face of natural disasters and other disruptions, how can automakers meet demand for product? Richard Kilgore is Associate Professor of Management and Business Administration at Maryville University. Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm terrific. How are you, Robert?
Great. Thank you very much for speaking with me. So it hasn't been that long since Hurricane Ida came along. It devastated portions of the Gulf and Louisiana. What was the impact that it had on automakers specifically?
Well, the hurricane is actually a more predictable event than some of the other things that have been happening. It was always unfortunate that it does shut down operations for a while, but the devastation that you see from a hurricane is something you do put in your annual plan. You have backup contingencies for that, especially if you're manufacturing on the coast. So I didn't see as much of an impact from that, as much of it's just piling on top of all the other layers of uncertainty that automobile manufacturers have to face now in dealing with the supply chain partners.
Well, I do want to talk about that general topic as well, but I mean, even though you plan for it, though, does it not have a serious impact on available inventory, considering that how few automobiles new or used are available right now? Did this not exacerbate the situation of inventories?
Absolutely, because of all the damage that occurred. There's actually three areas of impact that it had. Directly on a consumer who had an automobile sitting outside their home that now has to replace that automobile or have it repaired. There's a shortage of parts. For all the dealerships in that area who also had similar damage to their vehicle inventory, there has to be repairs and replacements of that. And that inventory is not around like it used to be. And then you have the entire part of the industry that people don't think about, and that's all the fleet vehicles, all the commercial vehicles, all the repairs and replacements that have to be done. And in that same area, you have a large number of suppliers of the very parts that they're asking to be replaced. And the impact is just, it's devastating. But like I said, it's something that normally would have a 1 to 2 month recovery. But because of the other things that are exacerbating the problems these days, that 1 to 2 months isn't there. There is not inventory available like there normally would be.
And of course, the situation is nationwide for automakers, not just the Gulf, not just Louisiana. You can't get cars anywhere on dealer lots. So what are the other factors? I mean, clearly the semiconductor shortage is a big deal. Hurricane Ida came along to sort of like seal the deal. But I mean, basically, are there disruptions? What other kinds of things are making it tough on automakers today?
Well, I think it all started really with the tariff situation that a lot of people, and really to start out, anytime you have uncertainty and variability in supply chains, it's going to be a bad outcome. Supply chains are built, especially these days, for lean manufacturing. They're built for just-in-time deliveries. They're built to minimize the amount of inventory you have in the pipeline at all stages. So when you have something come along that you're not expecting, that creates some uncertainty, and it creates a change in your willingness to take on risk, especially when it comes to capacity. So what people saw when tariffs were first talked about was an opportunity to not increase capacity until that situation was settled. So the threat of tariffs was just as bad as the actual tariffs themselves, and that it left a lot of suppliers looking at capacity decisions in a new light, that they normally would take risks, but they weren't going to take that risk with that uncertainty hanging over their heads. Then right after that, the next wave comes in like a tsunami of the pandemic, where now people are shutting their plants down. They're on the buyer side, they're shutting their plants down on the supplier side with uncertainty about when they're going to come back online. And that uncertainty, unfortunately, combined with the tariff situation to create what I call the, what's the word part, when you have a high school dance and everyone's on opposite sides of the room waiting to pick their partners.
I don't know, a rumble?
Yeah. But relationships that used to be pretty solid broke up.
Yeah.
And partners started looking for other partners. And the situation was such that a lot of the Asian suppliers went with European buyers because North Americans were no longer going to be as reliable as they once were.
So that was like a long-term shift then, not just of the moment.
It's a long-term shift, and the fact that the pandemic and the tariffs started making people think differently about, should we take this domestically? Should we continue to have global suppliers, for this industry? And it changed the relationships, and we have new partnerships forming. And the tough part about new partnerships and supply chains is you lose that trust. That trust is so difficult to build up over many, many years that I'll be there for you. I'll put on the second shift. I know I can depend upon you for 5, 10 years worth of business.
Mhm.
I'm going to take risks for you. When you're forming a new relationship, you're no longer as willing to take on that risk. That's the analogy I use. Some of my colleagues don't like it, but I always look at
Makes
it
sense.
as, I look at supply chain as dating. There's short-term dating and there's long-term dating, and there's different reasons for doing both.
Yeah. And of course, adding to the nightmare is just the general impossibility of getting product that is in the pipeline coming in
Right.
through ships, through ports, through rail yards, trucks and stuff like that. So what kind of actions, it sounds like, a lot of this is just out of the control of automakers and manufacturers in general. What kind of actions can they take to remedy the issue?
Well, I would ask all your users to go back, especially the business school users, go back to their operations management course and look up something called the bullwhip effect. It might have been done with something called the beer game in your class, where you put uncertainty into a supply chain and saw how the magnitude of the oscillations gets larger and larger the further back you go in the supply chain. And you learn in that exercise that there's a natural unwinding of that process that takes time. You cannot adjust it like a thermostat and immediately expect the effect to take place. So there are no short-term solutions to long-term problems. There are a series of short-term fixes and workarounds, and that's what's being done currently in the auto industry to find emergency inventory wherever they can.
Mm-hmm.
But long-term, I think there'll be a reorganization of supply chains and partnerships that will take several years to work its way out. And I think you'll see a return to something we used to call buffers and inventory buffers. And when the supply does catch up with demand, you'll see additional ordering take place so that we now are prepared for the next uncertainty that we didn't prepare for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a section of every 10K and annual report where you're required to report to shareholders your risk mitigation strategies. And I think you'll see a lot more emphasis placed on that section of the report, where corporations will have to lay out for their shareholders and owners, how are we going to be prepared for the next case like this?
So more than just a rearrangement of dance partners, to extend your metaphor.
Exactly.
Actual permanent changes in amount of inventory in the pipeline.
Right. There's going to be differences in expectations of your partner in the relationship. And there's going to be opportunities to invest in risk reduction strategies. That it's what we used to do in the old days before lean and just in time came around.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have buffers to manage this uncertainty. And I think you'll see that kind of investment will be seen as a capital investment, just like a new plant. We just have to set aside a certain percentage of our capital funding to build up inventories again, even if we don't have them on site, have them someplace in the world where we can, get to a warehouse someplace and feed from that if we're short, things like semiconductors, which, I'm sure there's a lot of capacity planners like me in the past that are sitting there saying, I should have ordered more back in 2019 and 20. They were so cheap. We have warehouse space all over the country. We could use shopping malls, for example, to store inventory very cheaply.
Well, Toyota did. Toyota ordered more. They were ahead of the game for a while, but it caught up with them too.
Absolutely. And that's, they were the originators of the lean manufacturing principles, and they taught us a lot about just in time themselves. And even with their advanced forecasting that they did in this case, they still were short. And I think the numbers are something like 5% of their 2021 manufacturing production will be not there this year because of their own shortages. So go ahead.
So in addition to there being more inventory in the pipeline, do you believe that OEMs and manufacturers are going to spread their business around a little more and rely more on multiple suppliers of parts, or will they continue to pursue sole supplier strategies because of the cost benefits and the specialty nature of the parts they're getting? What will they do in that regard?
That's a great question, because let's continue with that relationship analogy. What do you do when you just had a breakup? You're kind of uncertain going into the next relationship. How much can I trust you as a single supplier to be there for me? Mm-hmm. So the diversification strategy you're talking about is exactly what everyone will be recommending. How do you handle uncertainty? You have more suppliers, a larger supplier base spread out over multiple areas of the globe. In case one area is subject to tariffs, you go to the other places. Mm-hmm. But the other strategy is, no, I'm fearful now. I'm going to actually buy that supplier and make them part of my organization. So you'll see some,
in-house, bringing it back in-house.
Right, bring it back in-house. Henry Ford is probably, kind of chuckling right now in his grave saying, hey, I never had this problem. I used to make everything that went in the car. I owned all my sources of supply. I owned iron ore mines. I never had worries like this because I built everything.
Mm-hmm. I think I just figured out why I hated going to prom in high school. The complexities are just too much to bear. Well, that is a great painting of the picture of what automakers are facing today, plus how the landscape might look in future. Richard Kilgore of Maryville University, really appreciate you spending time with me to help enlighten me on this topic. Thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you so much. Anytime.